Dart manipulation. I remember learning how to rotate darts when I started studying fashion, and it's a cool little exercise, but it's also kind of pointless. Hi, welcome to Pattern Making with Lee. Today we're going to talk about dart manipulation. Dart manipulation is simply changing the location of a dart, so where it is positioned on the garment. This is also known as rotating darts. And yes, I will show you how to rotate darts, but this whole exercise is a bit pointless unless you have intent. While it can sometimes feel that darts are always getting in the way of your design, they're actually an incredibly powerful design tool. So today I'm going to show you how to move darts to a location that works for your design, and then how to use the dart and the dart excess, so that area between the dart legs, to create beautiful design detailing. This is the toile one of my students looks for her collection, and all this excess here was created by dart manipulation. She started with my CLIQD Torso block and trimmed the hem. Trimming the hem first is important because it gave her access to both darts. You can only rotate darts if the dart legs and the dart excess are at a seam or hem, so an edge. You can't rotate this waist dart or a torso block because it's within the pattern piece, unless you put a seam or hem through it, like my student did. When rotating darts, you also need to look at the shape of the dart. If it's a triangular wedge, it's really easy to close because the edges are straight. And my student moved hers to the center, just above the waist, because that's where she needed to add the excess for the tie. See how it's in the same direction as the folds on the toile? But what happens when the dart is curved or shaped? The waist dart on a torso block should be shaped, because you need to take a bit more off above the waist there, but this shaping is for a very specific part of the body. So when you rotate this dart, just create sort of triangular wedge and rotate it that way. And then when you create your toile and you've moved your dart to a new location, you can then look at your toile and see if you want to add some shaping back in. So my student drew a wedge. The lightest part of the wedge needs to be at the seam or hem so you can rotate it. And then she moved it over here. Why didn't she rotate the dart into the same location as the other one? Because when you're turning the dart excess into gathering or flare, you actually want to spread over an area. Gathering and flare doesn't happen in one spot. So what you want to do is pick the area where you want to add the gathering or flare to, and then spread the dart excess over that area, not all in one spot. Another thing to note, you can see some of the shaping from the original dart is still here. Because we need to create a wedge to rotate it, we couldn't transfer that shaping. So you can just rub it out and remove it from your pattern. My student's leaving the dart open, i.e. not sewing along the dart, because the dart excess is being used to create the tie. However, if she did want to turn this excess into a dart, she could then toile the pattern as it is now, and then pin along the dart and see if you need to move any extra excess to fit around that area. So the dart would look a little something like this. It will be slightly curved at and just above the waist. Before we move on, I'll quickly show you how she finished the rest of the pattern. It turned out really well, it was absolutely beautiful, and I'm sure at least one or two of you want to make it for yourselves. So the darts are rotated to get the excess. Then she drew a neckline and extended the front to create the tie. Then she toiled it. I tell my students to leave a bit of wiggle room. It's much easier to subtract fabric than to add it back in. So maybe make the tie a bit longer and wider than you want, and the neckline a bit higher. Whew, okay, so much for a short intro, but I want to give you an example of what this video is about. Rotating with intent. Harnessing the power of darts to create really clever and beautiful design details. So let's get the how out of the way, and I'll show you how to make darts into stylines, gathering, flare, and pleats. Before we get started, here are some dart manipulation examples from Fashion Week to get you inspired to start creating amazing designs with darts. For this demonstration, I'm going to use my torso block, which I sell on my website, CLIQDPatternKits.com. I perfect this block over my career working for brands like Alexander McQueen and Jenny Packham, and it's the block I use when I want to make dresses that have dart manipulation. And for this demonstration, I'm going to turn the torso block into a bodice block. This isn't quite as simple as cutting along the waist seam though. There are a couple more steps. I've done a whole video on it, which I'll leave a link to in the description. So when you buy this block on my website, you're actually getting 3 blocks for the price of one. So for $32 Australian, it's a very good deal. There are 2 ways to rotate darts. You can use the slash and spread method, or you can pivot the dart. For the slash and spread method, make a copy of your block and draw a line on it where you want the dart to move to. This will be your slash line, which is where you'll move your dart to. Or rotate some of the dart. You don't always want to rotate all the dart. A good example would be a shift dress, which has a small little bust dart, but the rest gets sort of sent down to the hem to create a nice flared shape. So keep that in mind, you don't need to rotate everything. And another thing to keep in mind, and sort of rule number 1 of rotating darts, you must rotate from the bust point, not the dart point. So the bust point is where the nipple is, and the dart point is where your dart actually finishes. See how my slash line ends here? The bust point should be marked on your block, and it will be on the bust line. The dart point should be about 2 centimeters or 3/4 of an inch from the bust point. This will stop the dart creating a point over the nipple. If you don't have a bust point marked on your block, draw a line through the center of each dart, and the point where they meet should be the bust point. After you draw your slash line, you need to extend the dart to this point too, so you can rotate both around the same point. Then, simply cut along the slash line, finishing just before the bust point. Then, close the original dart, or some of the dart, and voila, you've moved your dart to a new location. The pivot method is slightly different. What you do is you're copying the pattern in sections essentially. So you draw everything from one side of the original dart to where you want the new dart to be. Then you pivot the pattern to close the original dart and then draw the rest of the pattern in. So you're kind of copying the pattern in sections and pivoting the dart rather than using a slash and spread technique. Start by placing your block on top of some pattern paper and pinning it in place. Then mark where your new dart will be and trace or draw everything to one side of the original dart and your new dart. You usually copy the side with the center front and center back. Then you'll grab your awl, or even a pin will work, and put the pointy bit at the bust point. And pivot the pattern until the top dart leg is on top of the bottom dart leg, which will close the dart, and the excess will move to your new location. Then just trace and draw the rest of the pattern. And I think everyone's used the slash and spread method. Generally speaking, people recommend if you're a beginner to use a slash and spread method because there's less chance of you pivoting the dart incorrectly. But slash and spread method is so good because it'll actually leave what I call memories on your pattern. So if something goes wrong in the future and you're trying to work out what happened, you can go back and see how much you removed and where you put it to. It's just a really good idea so you can backtrack and see what you've done with your work. Whatever method you decide to use, remember rule number 1 of rotating darts, always rotate from the bust point, not the dart point. And once you move your dart, you need to redraw it. So, same as before, the dart point needs to be 2 centimeters, so 3/4 of an inch from the bust point. So just mark a point 2 centimeters away in the center and then redraw the dart legs. If your dart is quite big, you might want to add seam allowances along it. However, if your dart is small, or perhaps your fabric is lightweight or see-through, you might want to keep all the dart excess. And then you need to determine the shape of the excess at the seam allowance. The best way to do this is to fold the dart, make sure the excess is going in the direction you want to sew it, and place the dart point on the corner of a desk, and then just trace over the seam with your tracing wheel, and that will give you the shape. If you aren't sure which way to fold the excess, I've got some guides for you. Fold the excess down towards the waist for darts located anywhere along the armhole and center front or center back line. Fold the excess towards the center for darts located along the shoulder and neckline. For darts along the side seam, I like to fold the excess up. And for darts along the waist, I like to fold the excess towards the side seam. These are just recommendations that use the natural curves of the body to help hide the bulk from the dart excess. Okay, that's how to rotate darts. Now we're going to talk about where to put them, how to distribute them, and how to finish your patterns so you can create beautiful design detailing, like my student did. But before we get into that, I want to share one cautionary tale. Darts can get too big. When you combine the waist and bust dart on a bodice block, it gets big. And say you add a neckline, which you'll need to contour. Contouring just means removing a bit of excess to fit the body correctly. And say your design doesn't have sleeves. You need to remove a bit of excess from the armhole because blocks with sleeves should have a bit of excess added to the armhole, which you need to remove for sleeveless designs. When you move this armhole and neckline excess into the dart, it gets way too big. And this is a very normal design scenario. I'm not trying to scare you or anything. Removing dart excess to have a sleeveless design and having a neckline contouring is very standard design practice. And this dart is too big. Even the best machinist couldn't sew it. It would be just too pointy. So if you are thinking of combining both darts and just having a simple sort of bust dart to the side, use my 1 dart fitted dress block. This block is really special because it combines the bust and waist dart of a torso block into one non-pointy dart. And this block is only something you know about if you've worked with high-end designers in the industry. They don't really talk about it or teach it at universities. I'm not really sure why. Maybe because it's a bit of more modern recent block and they're not kind of fully aware of it, or because it's one you're going to create by draping. You can't really flat pattern making it. It's very sculpted to the body. The only downside is you can't rotate this dart because because it's so sculpted to that specific part of the body, you can't really move it around. So you do actually need both blocks if you're going to make lots of patterns. Use the one dart fitted dress block if you want to keep darts to a minimum and have a really fitted design that doesn't really feature darts. But if you want to use darts to rotate them, create design features, then use the torso block. And speaking of design features, let's see how to make some. Darts can be rotated anywhere. Dart rotation is a design choice, and a dart can be rotated to any location around the pattern outline without affecting the fit or size of the pattern, as long as you rotate from the bust point, not dart point. You can get creative too. The design can be asymmetric, or both darts can be on the same side. You can also have intersecting darts. When you pick your location, it's important to think about your design, and I'm going to run through some common design features now. If you want to practice dart rotation and creating these design features, you can get a quarter-scale PDF of the torso block I'm using on my website. It's completely free. Just add it to your cart, check out, and print the A4 PDF. If you want to create style lines from your darts, you need to move the darts to where you want the style lines to be. Take a princess seam finishing with the shoulder, for example. You can leave the waist dart and then move the bust dart to the middle of the shoulder. Then, rather than redraw the darts, cut along the darts to separate the two pattern pieces. The bust shaping on what is now your front side piece will look a bit off, so you need to add a bit above the bust line and blend the lines to create a nice smooth shape. You can then add seam allowances. Turn the original drill holes into notches, and it's a good idea to put a notch 2 centimeters or 3/4 of an inch either side of the bust line. Because we had to reshape the bust, it becomes slightly bigger, so you need to ease this area, just slightly. For gathering, the first thing you need to do is decide where you want your gathering to be, and then put a notch at the beginning and the end of the gathered section on your pattern. In this example, I want my gathering to be along the waist seam between the center front and the waist dart. Great news, I can already use the excess from my waist dart, so all you need to do is rotate the bust dart down. Before you rotate your dart, make sure you measure the length of the gathered section on your pattern. Don't include any dart excess, just measure along the seam. This measurement will be your finished length, so mine is 7 centimeters, so when I write how much to gather the area to, I'll write gather to 7 centimeters. Now I'll draw my slash lines. I'm drawing a couple of slash lines so I can distribute the excess over the area evenly. After I rotate the dart, I'll blend my gathered area to create a nice smooth line. Blending is essentially finding the midpoint between two uneven lines or angles. And to be honest, I haven't put a lot of effort into this line because I know it'll be wrong. I did a lot of gathered detailing while I was working at Jenny Packham, and every time gathering is on the bias or slightly on the bias, you'll need to adjust this line, and the line will look really weird. Something like this. And it's not just over the gathered area. See how I've shortened the fabric along the bias here too? I just noticed from experience. You'll never be able to predict this. So the best thing you can do is just blend the area, then twirl your pattern in a similar fabric to your final fabric so it behaves in the same way. Put it on a mannequin, gather the section, and let it sit for a while, maybe overnight, so 24 hours, and then come back and the gathered section on the bias will have sagged a bit. Then all you do is sort of pull the fabric towards the seam, whether it's down towards the waist or up towards the neck, and then make sure it's really taut. And then you can just mark your new seam there. And then you trim off the excess, lay on top of your pattern, and then draw around it to get your new seam line. Once you have your seam shape, draw an arrowed line along it and write gather to X centimeters. X is whatever your gathered length was, so mine was 7 centimeters. A pleat is a dart that is folded and stitched along the seam. You don't sew along the dart legs, so you simply fold it at the seam and stitch along it. But you do create pleats the same way you would a dart. In this example, I'm going to turn the waist dart into a pleat, and I've moved the bust dart to the neck, and that will become a pleat too. For the waist pleat, I can just rub out the dart and draw an arrowed line between the two notches and write fold next to it. The arrowed line should point to where you want the fold to land. For the neck pleat, you need to draw the seam, like you would if you were drawing a dart, but you can remove the dart legs and just add an arrowed line and write fold next to it. If you want to create several small pleats, take the same approach as you did with the gathering. So, I draw slash lines at each point where I want to add a pleat. In this case, I would have 3 pleats. I'd make one from the waist dart and create 2 when I rotate the bust dart down there, and they are more or less evenly spaced apart. After I rotate the darts, I just need to draw the seams, erase the waist dart, and add my arrowed lines and write fold next to them. And the answer is yes. Pleats had the exact same problem as Gathering does on the bias. So create your lines, trial your pattern, and then see how much you need to remove on the bias. Flare is just an unstitched dart, so it's completely open, like my student did for her tie top. Another common design scenario where you use flare is to transfer the bust dart down into the waist dart. This will give you a lot of volume in the front, which can be great for oversized fluid silhouettes. And you just blend the seam across the dart excess. And that's how you not only rotate darts, but use them to create beautiful design detailing. And I usually rotate darts pretty early in the pattern making process, so usually when I get my block, because I really determine the overall silhouette of your design. And rotating darts is actually quite a small part of the pattern making process. And if you need help making patterns and want some step-by-step support, check out my CLIQD pattern kit guides. While it may seem like I covered a lot in this video, this content is just a tiny, tiny section of my CLIQD Torso guide. It also covers style lines, contouring, making darts disappear, how to create different necklines and design details, draping, essentially everything you need to create a design based off the torso block. And if you enjoyed this video, you'll love this next one. And make sure you subscribe to my channel. I've got lots more pattern making videos coming up, including how to make darts disappear and how to turn a fitted block into an oversized one.